Good morning and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today I'm going to be talking about uh, Dungeons and Dragons, the direction that Hasbro and WOTC is going in, and all of the brouhaha over the OGL and so on and so forth. And, you know, just as a real quick note, why did I refer to myself as DM Bloodworth? Because today I'm talking mostly about dungeon mastering and Dungeons and Dragons. If I were focusing on a different game system like Castles and Crusades, I would then use Castle Keeper. And if I were talking about Conan 2D20, I would be talking about Game Master. So it really depends on the system that you're using as to the title that you're using for running that particular game. Um, Blade Runner, you're called a runner. In old school D&D, you were called a referee until Dungeon Master was coined a few editions later. If I were running Call of Cthulhu, it would be a keeper. So the title of the individual running the game at the table changes based on which game system you're talking about. So Dungeon Master isn't a pinnacle of all of those different titles performing the same role at the gaming table. Uh, it is very exclusive to running Dungeons and Dragons. So let me set that aside for a moment and start going into um, my my discourse here. So looking at the graphic that I put up, because a lot of these things I will touch on along the way, and they're kind of like my little quick notes and such. This is not completely unscripted. I do have a series of bullet points I'm going to hit on as well. But I want to make it very, very clear that Hasbro does not equal Dungeons and Dragons. WotC does not equal Dungeons and Dragons. All right, the game system and the legacy of that game is Dungeons and Dragons. Hasbro is just the big corporate owner of Dungeons and Dragons, and WotC kind of guides it forward through, their business model and what they're looking to do with that intellectual property. All right, but you can be opposed to Hasbro and its ownership of Dungeons and Dragons. You can be opposed to Wizards of the Coast and not like the direction in which they're taking the IP, and you can still be a fan of Dungeons and Dragons. All right, you're still a supporter of Dungeons and Dragons. So really do need to make that separation between, the corporate ownership, the company direction, and the game system itself. All right. I put some other things here too. So let me break down Done D&D. All right. So that is my own. I coined this on the very first day that Wizards of the Coast announced one D&D. And it was really almost instant that I started to formulate my projection of where they were going to go with one D&D. And I, within moments, thought this is the end of tabletop Dungeons and Dragons as we know it. All right, I could see that they were moving towards a digital model, and knowing their past history, especially their connection to and their development of Sword Coast Legends, and already seeing that they were looking to go into a VTT model, and my experience with computer RPGs, particularly MMOs, I could see the writing on the wall right away that they were looking to fully digitize Dungeons and Dragons, at some point down the road. Um, I could see through the idea, and I knew immediately that one D&D did not at any moment mean that they were going to unify all of the editions into just one. That was that was a lie right from the get-go. They never had any intentions of doing that, even though they stated, "Oh, we're ending there will be no new editions or no editions of Dungeons and Dragons." It was always excluding the older editions prior to just the player's handbook of 5e. So, and then they refer to it as the 2014 player's handbook. All right. So they never intended to truly unify all of the all of the communities around Dungeons and Dragons, and certainly not all of the content creation through Dungeons and Dragons. And shortly after the one D&D announcement, they then Jeremy Crawford then came out and said, "Well, there's no canon prior to 2014." So they made it very, very clear that one D&D had nothing to do with the game as it was created and evolved over multiple editions over the past 40 plus years. That was the first thing that I realized. I also understood, because I understood what one D&D really meant for them, was they wanted to bring everybody in together into one hub where if you wanted to buy product, you can go to Wizards of the Coast to buy product. If you wanted to buy toys, you could get them from there as well. If you wanted to get PDFs for Dungeons and Dragons, that was the one-stop shop as well. And if you wanted to play on their virtual tabletop that they were going to begin to develop, that is where you were going to go in through, very much like a Steam portal. You can just jump in on one D&D and access your game and access your purchasing and access your networking and whatever. They're really looking to bind everything into one hub. All right. So again, it was never about the unification of editions. It was always about having one-stop shopping. So now we get to the point where, whether it was leaked or an intentional leak, I don't think it was intentional, that 1.1 of the OGL got out there. This wasn't a proposed OGL. They were going to come right out on Friday the 13th and say, this is what the new OGL is, and it takes effect immediately. All right. That was their intention, was to immediately release it without ever presenting it to any kind of a polling or discussion or anything, whether it be, well, certainly not externally, but a lot of what I heard was that there wasn't very much internal discussion about it either. Everybody was told, you toe the line, or they were afraid to talk about it. They were afraid to talk about the direction of it. And that's what I've seen from multiple sources. So anyway, regardless, this was released. All right. And it wasn't released as a rumor. It wasn't released as a fragment. The entire document was released. And this wasn't a draft. All right. There's no such thing as a 9,000 word plus 20 plus page draft. This was the whole thing. All right. And the fact that it was supposed to take place on the 13th, and I believe the leak was on the 9th or the 10th, whatever that Monday was. That was the That was their intention. All right. And then the pushback came, and the pushback was dramatic. So when we started seeing D&D Beyond, and I'm going to talk about that in relation to Done D&D. All right. Both Done D&D and D&D Beyond are parodies of one D&D and D&D Beyond. All right, they're parodies. They're not meant to be taken literally. No one is actually calling for or expecting that Dungeons and Dragons, the game system, all right, with all of its different editions, is going to suddenly disappear. All right. Maybe Hasbro's ownership might change of it, or WOTC's direction of it might change, but the game system is always there. All right. So no one is calling for, and they legitimately couldn't even enforce a reduction or a total, eradication of Dungeons and Dragons. I'm running this today. All right. Still consistently running this. All right. 1979 to this very day. 10 years from now, I could still be running this if I choose to. Right? Nothing can take this away. All right. This Dungeons and Dragons will live on for as long, for me, for as long as I can run it. All right. And no one can take that away. No one can take away the physical copies of anything that you have. All right. And there's nothing to stop you from running it at your table the way that you choose to. All right. And this is something that I think Wizards of the Coast, stepping in, they really don't understand, or they expected that well, if we move the whole thing to digital, then we can control what the book says today, what it says, or the rule systems say today. We can then alter it tomorrow. We can push it in a new direction the next day, and you have no control over that because it's not physical. All right. It's not in your possession. So they can alter it however they want. And if you're tied to a digital copy, you're tied to it. You have no place else to go. All right. So the whole idea of D&D Beyond as being literal is not what it was ever meant to be. It's just a play on the words, just like Done D&D was a play on the words when I thought of that tag for it. So D&D is forever. All right. And that's something I'm going to touch upon here when we look at Cynthia Williams, the CEO of Wizards of the Coast, and the way that she looks at the game and how the game and the player base interact with it. She has been very public with saying D&D is undermonetized. That's number one. She's also been very public with saying that she doesn't understand or really doesn't like the fact that once you've bought the books, you can play for a lifetime. All right. That is just so counter corporate think that they want a game system that has a recurring revenue stream. All right. And that's coming from a video game mentality. So I understand it with video games. Video games operate on a subscription based process, or sometimes they're a hybrid subscription plus microtransactions. That's what moves it along. That's why video games, especially multiplayer online video games, can generate billions of dollars per year, all right, in revenue. And this doesn't, all right? This is something that you could have bought in 1979 along with the Monster Manual and the Player's Handbook, and you could still be playing it today. And you laid out a total of, I don't remember what they cost back then, but you laid out a total of maybe $60. And 40 plus years later, you're still playing it. All right. No added expense other than the cost of paper and pens and, the other side materials that you made. Many people still play this with their original dice. All right. So you don't even need to upgrade that over time either. It truly is an evergreen hobby that these corporate people coming out of the video game sphere don't understand, and they also resent it. Cynthia Williams also mentioned that only dungeon masters buy the books, or predominantly only dungeon masters buy the books. All right, that's not the player base's fault. All right, that has to do with the way that Wizards of the Coast actually puts things together. All right. I can break out all of the 13 hardbacks of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. The DMG is the Dungeon Masters alone. All right. A monster manual, I would also argue that's really a Dungeon Masters only. All right. The Player's Handbook is for both the DM and players. Focus more on the players. Unearthed Arcana, mostly both. All right. Both have reasons to use it. All right. Then you have the Wilderness Survival Guide. You have the Dungeoneer Survival Guide. Those are, both again. All right. You start to see what I'm talking about here. When you have the World of Greyhawk source book, both DM and players can use it. You have the Dragonlance source book, both players and so on and so forth. There were more hardcover books put out during AD&D First Edition that catered to both the needs of the dungeon master and the player at the table. Wizards of the Coast now likes to put in every source book and every other thing that these are, they throw an adventure in it. And once you throw an adventure in every single book that you produce, or virtually every single book that you produce, you just made it exclusive to the dungeon master. All right. And now the players shouldn't have access to it. Otherwise, they're going to spoil the adventure that is built into the book. It's a bad business model. You're creating your own problem of, well, only DMs buy this. Well, of course, only the DMs are going to buy it, because players, if they bought it, they would ruin the adventure that's in there. They'd already know what everything was going on about. So again, just a lack of understanding of the industry and their own product line, on the shoulders of Cynthia Williams. She understands video games, all right, and microtransactions and everything. That's her wheelhouse. So when she comes here, they don't mesh. They don't work together. It's two totally different industries, two totally different ways of looking at a product, all right, and a product line. So that's the next thing. On top of that, since the last 4 or 5 years, really ever since Mike Merles was replaced and the new creative directors of Dungeons and Dragons were moving in, you see a further movement away from rulings over rules, replacing it, flipping it to rules over rulings, more reliance on the rule book, and further diminishing the role of the dungeon master. All right. And that, if you want to describe the dungeon master as being the one at the table with a crown, right? And so the dungeon master is wearing a crown. Well, this crown is being diminished and taken away from that player sitting at the table, and then at the same time they want to complain and whine about, well, there's a DM shortage in 5e. All right. People don't want to, pick up the role of dungeon master. Well, they're doing everything that they can to make it less desirable to actually run games. All right. And the dungeon master AI, which I'll get to more further, is like the final stroke in that movement of theirs. Let's talk about the crown of the dungeon master, and let's talk about the times when or the time when that crown was removed. All right. The only instance in the past of anyone being denied the use of the title of dungeon master was when Lorraine Williams of TSR threatened to sue Gary Gygax if he used Dungeon Master in his two books, Mastering the Game and Player Mastery in role playing games. So he was forced to use the term Game Master in those two novels instead of Dungeon Master. So the only instance, and by sheer coincidence, the last name Williams again came from the CEO of the corporate or business that controlled Dungeons and Dragons. And here we have once again Cynthia Williams suggesting through the price structure of the virtual tabletop of 1D&D that at the two lower tiers, or the lower tiers, I should say, at the lower tiers of the virtual tabletop, a dungeon master will not be able to homebrew. All right. So you'd have to pay at some point, possibly even just at the top, at the $30 a month level, you will be able to create as a dungeon master. All right. And at the lower tiers, as they say in their own documents, in their lower tiers, you will have no homebrew capability. You will be using an AI dungeon master. All right. You're playing a video game. You're coming in as a player only, and you are playing through a scenario that is laid out for you, railroady as any video game is. All right. And unless you pay at some higher level tier, will you be able to engage it as a dungeon master. All right. And then, even then, you might not even have all of the tools unless you go to the highest level suite at $30 a month just to do what you've always been able to do at your own table. See, this is why I'm saying that D&D Beyond, call is not saying we're going to reject all of Dungeons and Dragons. We're just going to reject the idea that in order to continue playing Dungeons and Dragons, you have to be on the virtual tabletop. You have to be through D&D Beyond. All right. And you have to pay at a $30 or possibly less level per month just to participate as a dungeon master using Dungeons and Dragons 6e. I don't know anybody who's going to do that. And even the most the most ardent supporters of Wizards of the Coast now, when it comes down to oh, you got to pay $30 a month to do this. It's they're going to drop off. They're going to drop off real fast once they start seeing how how limiting it is unless you pay a lot of money. $30 a month is a lot of money. All right. And they're not going to do it. They're going to fall back on playing their tabletop role playing games. All right. So, why Hasbro and WOTC may not be able to walk their mess back? Because they've gotten caught in too many lies. All right. Whether it be from backwards compatibility to we're not going to have any more additions to now, oh well, this was never intended, this was just a draft, or we didn't we never thought that we could ultimately steal people's creations and then block that never crossed our mind. Just too much. Even in their first apology, not even it's a non-apology apology letter, when they talked about 2.0, um, there were at least seven lies buried in the first two paragraphs of that. And now they have another person which we never heard of before, is now coming out and saying, oh well, we got this wrong. We recognize that we got this wrong. That individual only apologizes about the way the message was delivered and not about the message. All right. And so again, I don't see them walking this back. All right. And the reason why it can't be easily walked back is because this is not just the OGL 1.0 creators pushing back on this. This isn't just the OSR, all right, the old school revival, renaissance, um, role playing community pushing back on this idea. Actually, old school revivalists such as myself, I am the least impacted by this because I will still have this for the next 30 years that I might be able to play. All right. I will still have this and I will still be running this. None of this stuff going on with Wizards of the Coast will impact my ability to continue playing Dungeons and Dragons the way I have been since 1977. All right. And I hope to have at least another 30 years to go. I'm 56 now, or nearly 56 now. If I get another 30 years to go in running this, I certainly will. All right. So it doesn't impact a good portion of what the OSR is. The independent publishers, in many cases, they don't use the OGL, and I will go through a few of them as well. But they don't use the OGL, so it has no impact on them. The real surprise, I think, for Wizards of the Coast is the pushback from the 5e community. And when I talk about the 5e community, I'm talking about, in particular, the proponents on YouTube of 5th edition, those people who built whole channels around talking about and promoting and improving upon 5e and so forth. It was those individuals. When this first started hitting, I started looking at, well, who's talking up against this? Who's talking out against 1.1? And I was shocked to see people with, and I'm not going to go through all of their names now. I've kind of mentioned it in the past, but, I want to give them some breathing room as well. But I counted at least 10 YouTube channels with over 100,000 subscribers, all right, that or very near 100,000 subscribers, over, let's say, 70,000 subscribers, at least 10 with over 70,000 subscribers that were saying this is bad. All right, 1.1 is really bad. All right, and And it's been their voices that have pushed the D&D Beyond, in other words, to cancel your subscriptions at D&D Beyond. All right. It has been their push that has really affected. Now, I've heard a number of 40,000 unsubscribed in that first day. All right. That the calls were put out there. And I have, I've had some people counter with, "Whoa, there's 10 million subscribers, all right, to D&D Beyond." So 40,000 is a drop in a bucket, all right. 10 million subscribers doesn't mean that there's 10 million paying subscribers, but the 40,000 that canceled their subscriptions, they were all paying subscribers. All right. Otherwise, WOTC wouldn't have cared. All right. Or HASBRO wouldn't have cared about them being like, "Oh, I canceled my account. I wasn't paying anything to begin with." That's no loss to them. All right. You're not even considered a potential customer to them. All right. So, and 100% of the D&D paid subscribers were 5e players. Why do I say that? How can I say that to such a definitive number? Because D&D Beyond only supports Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. So it stands to reason that anybody paying a subscription to D&D Beyond, all right, is a 5e player or 5e dungeon master. No one else has any reason I can't do anything with AD&D First Edition on D&D Beyond. All right, there is absolutely no support to anything prior to 5th Edition on D&D Beyond. All right, which points to their lie earlier on that one D&D is going to bring everybody together in some kind of a kumbaya. This is Dungeons and Dragons for everybody. All right, it's always been Dungeons and Dragons for those currently in 5e, but they started to realize that they are going to get left behind with this new model of Dungeons and Dragons, all right, the digital Dungeons and Dragons. All right, they realize that unless they pay $30 a month, that they won't be able to fully engage at the same level they could for free at their own table. All right. And that's the real shift. And that's what's being pushed upon, pushed back on. So it's not D&D be gone, get rid of your books. You have to burn your books. So you have to, figuratively or literally, you're not burning books when you cancel your subscription. Whatever you bought already is still there under your free subscription. You haven't lost your library. So that's another fallacy. That's another scare tactic that, oh, don't cancel your subscription because anything you bought in the past is going to disappear. Not true. You're just not going to get anything in the future. And everything that you have already bought is still there. All right. If that were the case, you'd be able to sue them for stealing your property. All right. Because that is, unless they treat it as a rental. Now, if they treat it as a rental, then why the heck would you ever engage in that kind of a transaction? All right, I'm renting this space, and then as soon as I leave, I don't take any of the product with me. I'm paying almost full cost for rented space. It's just not a good. It's not a good bargain. All right, that's why they always say, do you rent or do you buy a home? You're always better off buying a home. Buy a home, hardcover. All right, can never be taken away from you, or even the 5e. If you have 5e and you have those books, just play that. No one is stopping you from doing that. Let me see. Sorry, lost. So let's talk about the new OGL. All right, a new OGL, the orc system, which everybody is now talking about. It's the orc system. It's run by Paizo and Kobold Press and some other, some Green Ronin and some other, companies are looking to put this together. And I have a question, that it came to me. And this is really prompted a little bit by something that Questing Beast also mentioned. And it's something that I looked through the books here that I'm going to go to. But here's my question. If the new OGL under the orc system is system neutral, why do we need an OGL at all? If it can be applied to every single system, then you don't need it. All right. In my opinion, you don't need it. All right. And that's something that Questing Beast put out very early on. He said that probably about 2 weeks ago, he stated that if there's the big secret is that you really don't need the OGL at all. The big secret is that as long as you steer clear of copyright name nomenclature from the games that you're looking to publish for, you're okay. So as long as you don't put Beholder in there or Mind Flayer, or Boule or whatever, as long as you don't copy word for word game mechanics into your product, you're okay. You don't even need an OGL statement in order to do that. And that's the big secret, right? And that's the reason why I don't believe Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro will sue anybody who is publishing a product that doesn't infringe upon their copywritten or trademark. All right, but simply uses the rules mechanics of D&D. Because if they risked suing them over that, because they can't sue over rules mechanics alone. All right, they've already lost that lawsuit. All right, if they actually went after somebody for just simply creating a retro clone, let's say, that doesn't use any of those things, they might lose the whole shebang, right? They might actually have a judge rule that the OGL is unnecessary completely. All right. And then people will feel much more confident in just publishing their own thing. And I have seen statements from certain game companies, certain publishers that have said the only reason why we include the OGL is because TSR was so litigious, and Wizards of the Coast, we expected to do the same because this was all around that same time period. So even though we don't have a lot of SRD bleed over, we still put it in there just in case. I've heard other publishers say the only reason why we put WOTC's OGL into the back of our book was so that even though we don't think that we needed it for our game system, we saw it as a way to give people the confidence that third-party creators can create for our game system. So that was the only working OGL around. And again, probably not necessary to begin with. But what those companies should have done, and that's what some of the companies are doing now, is they're not joining one of these system neutral OGLs, which I think is completely unnecessary then. They're going to create an OGL that's specific to their game and allow for third-party creators to produce adventures and other supplements and everything for their game system, all right, and open that door for them. All right, so that I think is where it's going to go, and that's why I think that the realization is out there that that's the way to go, and that's why Hasbro and WOTC can't walk this mess back. All right, they left the barn door open. They've made it clear that they resent the business model of tabletop role playing and anyone who has taken advantage of that business model. They resent the fact that it's not a video game business model, that it doesn't have recurring charges that they can keep on collecting out of you, that game systems are, for the most part, evergreen. You could buy the one edition that you really enjoy and play that for the rest of your life, and there's nothing that they can do to stop you from doing that. It's DMs and GMs are empowered to do rulings over rules. They can't stand that because they can't control what's being done at gaming tables that way. They wanted to create a culture around Dungeons and Dragons where the rules are going to push the concepts and ideas of how to role play out there. And every table needs to have a rules lawyer, in their opinion, all right, to keep everybody tied to exactly what the book says, because the book is the expression of what they want gaming to be. So let me talk about a few systems that prove that either an OGL is not needed, or that WASPy, or that WOTC or HASBRO are not needed for you to continue to play Dungeons and Dragons. All right. My first example, I've held it up several times, and I have D&D behind me. I have, Holmes Edition, Mold Bay Edition, BECME, AD&D First Edition, Second Edition. I also have 3, 4, and 5 if I wanted to run any of those. All of these in hardcover. No OGL in any of these. All right. Obviously, they predate OGL, but I can run this for the rest of my life, and no one can stop me from doing so. So D&D Beyond doesn't apply. All right. It's unenforceable. So don't take it literally. It's figurative, and it's really just a parody of D&D Beyond. So don't get all twisted and nervous about that. It does not mean getting rid of Dungeons and Dragons. It might mean getting rid of Wizards of the Coast or HASBRO, which this will outlast both the corporation and Wizards of the Coast. I'm almost certain of it. Castles and Crusades. So this is my next go-to. Once my campaign is done here, I'm shifting over to Castles and Crusades. I'm looking to do things with Castles and Crusades. Castles and Crusades, produced by Troll Lord Games. One of they made one of the earliest statements that I came across on Twitter, that they're creating their own OGL. They have their lawyers going over it. They're skimming through their books and their rule sets to make sure that that they can excise any of the SRD that from Wizards of the Coast that had kind of crept its way over the decades that they've been producing this into their game system. They're removing them. That means changing a few names. It has nothing to do with the game system because it's been their own game system right from the get-go. All right. As a matter of fact, things were taken from Castles and Crusades and incorporated into D&D 5th edition. So D&D 5th edition is kind of a clone of this. All right. In some ways, it's a clone of this. It's a copy of this system. All right. So they have their own system. They're working on their own OGL. They have their own third-party publishing guidelines that have been better explained and hopefully streamlined and modified, so it's very, very clear how you can write for Castles and Crusades. So you can continue with the role-playing game of your choice at your table, at your local shop, or at a convention, all right, and have no problem whatsoever. Modifius announced that they're going to produce their own OGL. They currently do not use 1.0A in here. So they're not using WOTC's OGL. Didn't need to. Completely different system. No SRD from from Wizards of the Coast either. So they're creating their own. They're also creating their own third party program as well. They used to have one, I think, but it was very limited to just specific things at the time. I don't know if you'll be able to write third party for Conan 2D20 anymore because they no longer hold the license. Modifius no longer holds the license for Conan in tabletop role playing license portion of it. So, but that's a game system that you can play for the rest of your life, and it's not dependent on OGL, not impacted by Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro in any way. Dungeon Crawl Classics, another game system with no OGL. All right, and this is put out by Goodman Games and super popular. All in one volume. Everything you need in one volume. You can play this, even though it's in soft cover. It's with a little care. You can really play this for decades to come without it completely falling apart. And if your book ever falls apart, you just 3-hole punch it and throw it in a binder, and you're good to go. Adventure Conqueror King. All right, primarily by Alexander Macris, and no OGL, totally different system. Now, from what I understand, he has agreed to join and work on helping to develop the open role-playing creative license, or ORC, that's being spearheaded by Paizo and Cobalt Press and such. His added voice to there has cleared up some concerns about morality clauses and other kinds of things that might have found their way into the ORC creative license, that his insertion into that has kind of assuage some of those concerns, and I'm in agreement with it as well. This is but this is a game system that didn't require it at all. So an OGL to begin with at all. So the One Ring. So the One Ring is put out by Free League. Free League has announced that they are going to create their own OGL, and there's been no SRD connection to Dungeons and Dragons in this. There's no way OGL 1.0A in this at all. Didn't need to. Different system, different SRD, and they're creating their own. And Free League with other things, they're going to have a third party publishing as well. So these are just a few examples that I pulled off my shelf that I wanted to focus on and point out that D&D Beyond is a hysterical concern that it really means to eliminate Dungeons and Dragons. I think that these 6 examples that I showed you are examples of how you can continue as a dungeon master or a game master and as a player in the tabletop role-playing game of your choice. All right, and for decades or a lifetime, depending on how much you'll be able to stick with the hobby physically and mentally and so on, because there's no other inhibition to prevent you from, or I should say prohibition from you continuing with this. I could buy one book and play this one book for, play from this one book for a lifetime and never have any other expense. All right. It's not like moving on to a virtual tabletop that is going to charge you $30 a month in order to continue um, engaging with their game system at the highest level of doing so. I can do that for free. All right, on this. Now, I'm not begrudging Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro from creating the video game that they are apparently creating and calling it Dungeons and Dragons. And I don't begrudge them looking to make as much money as they possibly can. But but they're doing kind of like a scorched earth method behind it. They're trying to burn everything in their wake behind them so that if you chose to stay back and playing an older edition and still wanted to get new content for your older edition of Dungeons and Dragons that they abandoned, they wanted to make sure that that was burnt behind them, that you couldn't continue. And that was the level of unfairness. That was the level of spitefulness that I think that they got all this pushback over. And it's why that can't be walked back, that can't be apologized for, and then move forward with the plan as they were still intending to do. All right. That's the kind of thing where they hopefully do feel a certain amount of punishment for. There has to be a consequence for that breaking of trust. There has to be a consequence for that level of greed and that level of vindictiveness, which I really see it. Maybe that's just me, that I am reading a vindictiveness into it. But when I look at over the course of these years of their mistreatment of the legacy of Dungeons and Dragons, of the creators of Dungeons and Dragons, and then I look at the disclaimers that they put on the older products that they still sell themselves, and then I look at how they've diminished the role of the dungeon master and how they're projecting to have an AI dungeon master unless you pay at the highest level of access through a subscription model. How they've looked to burn all of these companies, which quite frankly kept D&D afloat with resources and with supplements and with adventure modules. People will claim, oh well, D&D puts out 4 hardcovers a year. All right, that's nothing in comparison to what Cobalt Press puts out in a year for supporting 5th edition. All right, this is something that I don't think Hasbro fully understood, was that they were a greater beneficiary of the OGL than the OGL creators were. All right, those third-party creators were, because it got the visibility of the brand out there everywhere you look. Everywhere you look on Drive-Thru RPG, you see 4-5e, 5e, for use with the world's oldest or greatest or oldest, role playing game, and so on and so forth. It's just constantly bombarded with. My prediction is that you're going to see that disappear. All right, within a matter of weeks or even months, you're going to go on to Drive-Thru RPG, and you're not going to see 5e here, 5e there, 4, 5e. It's going to disappear, because while this is in limbo, and people in the future, in the next couple of months, are sitting there wondering, well, crap, should I release this only to maybe have it pulled back, and taken away from me? Or am I going to release this without the 5e label, and just let it go out there, and it's just my product, and go with that? I'm hoping that that's the case, that people just put their stuff out there without any OGL or any other company's stamp on it and just make it, this is my product. Or they're making products for game companies that have their own OGLs and have their own third-party licensing agreements and structures on how to write for their game system, and we just see a much greater variety out there. Final note. Um, Again, for those individuals that say, this is, there needs to be one trusted, game system out there that everybody that is the that pulls the entire hobby along with it. It's just not the case. Um, I actually see it as a detriment if one game company has has the is the standard bearer of the entire hobby. No, there needs to be much more variety out there. There needs and players need to be open to playing different systems, all right, and within different genres and everything, in order for you to become a better player, in order for you to become a great dungeon master or a great game master, you need to incorporate more content from different places into your own gaming. All right, and you're not going to do that if you're sticking with one system for your entire lifetime, um, and with one player group for for all of your gameplay, or in one location for all of your gameplay. This is something that Gary Gygax wrote in his book. All right, that you can never be a great game master unless, because you can use Dungeon Master, you can never be a great game master if you're just playing one game from one company with one group of people in one location. You have to broaden all of your exposure to the hobby. And Gary Gygax cared about the hobby, all right, not just TSR. Even though TSR was very, very diversified as far as their RPG games that they supported. I mean, I have a whole stack of them right behind me over there. Um, yeah, so just look to broaden, look at this as an opportunity, not just to continue playing the game that you love, all right, but also as an opportunity to look at other game systems that are out there as well. You know, so that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave it at there. Uh, D&D Beyond is a reference to just D&D Beyond. Has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. Um, no one outside of Wizards of the Coast is stripping away your crown as dungeon master. Um, you know, direct your ire at the corporation and the company that produced this firestorm. They willingly and self-inflicted their own wounds in this. All right, and they do owe an apology, but their apology shouldn't be expected or accepted because they haven't shown the capacity to actually own up to their mistake, and the the cat is out of the bag. I mean, the bell has rung, and you cannot unring it, and people now know. Gaming publishers now know we got to create our own thing and go forward. And in many cases, they're not even creating a whole new game system. They're already had their game system. They're just creating um, more access to the game and reducing the visibility of the Dungeons and Dragons brand. I think is a better thing for the hobby as a whole, um, because it's going to bring players to other experiences that they might have only limited themselves to the McDonald's hamburger of the tabletop role playing game, which is WOTC's Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks for joining. I know this went kind of long, but I think it's an important thing to talk about. And I'm opened up to your questions and comments. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video out there. And as always, I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. And just keep on gaming. Just keep on playing the game that you love to play, whether that's D&D 5th edition, or it's Adventure Conqueror King, or it's DCC, or whatever. And no one can ever take your physical copies of your books away. All right, so have a great one. Take care.